Well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment.
Well, if it's okay with you, Ed, we can just jump right in.
Sure.
First of all, thank you for calling.
Yeah, thanks.
We're really excited to have you on as a guest. And the first question I usually ask our guest is, what does the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution mean to you as an individual?
Well, what it means to me, what it should mean is that it's one of the very few that the founders actually put in the Constitution. You know, the Ninth Amendment says there are many more than the ones they mentioned, but they actually thought the second was important enough to put in there because our founders were studiers of governments, not just our government, but all governments. And they knew what governments would do. Any government naturally will do. It'll try to grow. It'll try to take power, and government power is inversely proportional to people's freedom. So they tried to pick the ones that they had seen in the past that were more likely to get abused by the government. And so the Second Amendment just simply guarantees the right of citizens to keep and bear arms, to keep and bear weapons, bear meaning carry them about. And they didn't say that the government was forbidden from, absolutely abolishing that. They said they couldn't infringe upon it, which is even the slightest restriction or slightest government intrusion. Unfortunately, we've allowed the government to pretty much do almost anything. But, I started going to the Gun Rights Policy Conference in 1994, and I went for almost every year there for a couple of decades. And, I remember everyone would say, man, if we could just get a Supreme Court case saying it's an individual right, then all this would end. Mm-hmm. Well, and of course, that's exactly what we got. But despite them saying it's an individual right, it applies to the states. The old levels of scrutiny don't apply. Despite that, we still have states doing bans, waiting periods, registrations, taxes, and everything they were doing before we got the Supreme Court decision. So,
yeah, well,
the Second Amendment was the government telling the Second Amendment tells the government hands off. And my study of it, the founders had three reasons for why they put it in there. The most often reason was to defend ourselves against our own government. And you tell that to some people, and they think you're crazy, or violent. But you say, well, why did they put the First Amendment in there? I think it was to protect us from our own government. Why did they put the Third Amendment in there? I think it was to protect us from our own government. Fourth, fifth, all of them are in there to protect us, individual citizens, from our own government. So it'd be kind of odd if the second was anything else but that. But that was the most often reason by the founders. And the second, another one was common defense, so banding together. And then individual private defense was the third, the least common that I found mentioned. But those were the three mentioned. They never mentioned hunting. They never mentioned sport. It was all about defending ourselves against our government, defending ourselves against an outsider, and then defending ourselves against individual criminals.
Well, we're here in Illinois, so we're very familiar with the infringements.
Yeah, behind enemy lines.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the interesting part, isn't it? You touched on something really interesting there, that the Supreme Court was bold enough to take that stance in the Heller decision. But then, they haven't really followed up on it. And I think that if they had followed up on some of these other more onerous laws that pre-existed and have come after, I think we'd have a different situation. But for some reason, they haven't done that, and I can't quite figure that out.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they're doing. I've heard they might be trying to, gather several, like to go to the magazine restrictions and the assault weapons ban. They're trying to get several cases in different parts of the country. But we'll see.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Yeah, that's the key phrase, isn't it?
It's just how far we've come. The whole revolution started. The hotbeds were in Massachusetts and Boston, and instead of that, today being the standard bearer for being vigilant and holding our governments to protect individual rights, they're now leading the charge. And then Virginia, a Thomas Jefferson, a Virginian, wrote in the Declaration that we were endowed by our Creator with rights. And the Virginian that wrote the Declaration specifically said our rights come from God. And then just in this last year, a current federal senator from Virginia said on open mic, with cameras rolling, this thing about the rights coming from God and not our government is a dangerous idea. So we have absolutely gone 180 in places that used to be the bedrock for our rights.
I agree with with everything you just said there, but I also I feel like as a nation over the past, say, 7 years or so, we've actually gained traction in getting some of these restrictions repealed, with more states going to a constitutional carry, and things of that nature. But other states, such as Illinois and others that have decided that implementing, and I'm using air quotes, an assault weapons ban is their choice of options, or that was their option. They chose to try and, I think, pander to people under the guise of safety. And that's obviously very frustrating, not just for us here in Illinois, but everybody else that is having to deal with magazine capacity bans. And here in Illinois, their ban isn't just on what most people call an assault rifle, the AR-15, but it's very, very broad. There's a very extensive list on what cannot be purchased or transferred anymore in the state of Illinois.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons, like the Supreme Court was pretty clear, but if you just look down to the money, if they use government-paid state legislators to pass laws, clearly unconstitutional, but they pass them. And now gun rights organizations have to use precious private donations to fund the lawsuits to go against them. So even if that lawsuit takes, and it'll be start in the state court and then go up to the top of the state and then maybe jump federal, it could take 3-4 years.
Right.
And even if the Second Amendment prevails in a higher level court, then okay, it's just back to where it was in the beginning, but they drained the gun rights community of how many hundreds of thousands of dollars. So and their government-paid government lawyers are the ones that are protecting or trying to argue for the unconstitutional laws that the government-paid legislators pass. So they're using tax money to drain the donations of gun rights organizations. They'll just keep passing them and keep passing them and keep us tied up in the courts and keep our money flowing to legal fees.
Yeah, and from a political football standpoint, they can use that time frame that the ban was in place. They can, if they can use numbers that say there was a fall in crime or crime rate, then they can use that to support why the ban is a good idea. And if there isn't the data that supports what they want it to, then they can say we need to go further. So from a political standpoint, they can really take the results of that action they took and spin it to further their agenda either way, no matter what the data says. And that's one of the really frustrating parts on my end.
Yeah, and I think it's not a popular point of view, but I think people who say they support gun rights, a lot of us are lazy. A lot of us don't contribute. We don't pay attention. We're not vigilant. Our founder said, listen, we gave you this. All you got to do is keep it. But in order to keep it, you must be vigilant, because George Washington twice in public speeches, once his farewell address, likened the government to fire, and that it was an absolute necessity to have. You had to have it, but it would absolutely destroy you and everything you owned if you didn't keep it under control. So they urged us to be vigilant because, even though they had created this government, all governments will grow and try to infringe on your rights. And I think we've gotten so caught up in our kids' soccer game and our activities and our football games that we like to watch and our entertainment we watch, we've completely forgot to be vigilant and know what's going on, know our rights, know when government's violated, so we can hold their feet to the fire.
That's really interesting, because I've been a personal protection and self-defense trainer for over a dozen years, I think now. And what I notice is that when you address those kinds of things with the broader public, that it seems like it causes a lot of anxiety, because people have to think about things that they've never really thought before. And so it's really easy to get into your soccer games and all those things because they are less anxiety inducing. And so then, to ask people to sort of think about their government being a danger, or even the more clear and present dangers of, crime or violent crime or what have you, It doesn't make people comfortable. It's not something that have found that a broad sector of people want to really spend a lot of time thinking about, because they and this segues pretty nicely, I think, into your book. Have you found that to be the case with people, that it makes people uncomfortable?
Well, of course, and that's what the other side's counting on. Declaring independence and fighting for independence had to be extremely uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what we have to do, because our founders told us the government will come after your rights. No matter what kind of government it is, it will grow, which means your rights will go down. So we're telling you ahead of time that's what they're going to do. So when I lecture on this, I try to show a clip from the HBO miniseries John Adams.
Mm-hmm.
And it's later it's when John Adams and Ben Franklin are in France trying to coordinate financial and military aid to our revolution, to the war effort. And they're all on a table at Versailles, and all the French have their makeup and their wigs. And
yes.
Adams the only one there that doesn't speak English or doesn't speak French.
Yep.
And they start asking him about, do you know about this play? And do you know this composer? And do you know this music? And he doesn't know. And they're all kind of making fun of him. And I'm just paraphrasing here, but he says, no, you see, my country right now is in a fight for its life, its existence. So I don't have the time to study music and entertainment. I have to focus on warfare and politics. And if I get that right, then maybe my sons will have the ability to study commerce and trade and mathematics. And if they get that right, then maybe their children, my grandchildren, might have the luxury of studying philosophy and theater and music. And I think that's what we've forgotten. I know I run into people every day that can tell you the starting lineup of their favorite college basketball team, first name, last name, what their stats are. And you say, name one Supreme Court justice of the United States Supreme Court. And they look at you like, why would I even want to know that? So we've skipped over what we absolutely have to do to keep liberty, and we've gone to the entertainment and the fun stuff. And like you say, the stuff we're comfortable enough with. And that's why the other side is gaining ground.
Yep.
Well, it's a very convenient distraction to be able to disconnect and just in take in that entertainment and enjoy it, and not have to worry about essentially all the other stuff that really matters.
Yeah, and a lot of them make excuses why they don't get involved, why they don't donate. And a favorite one is, well, there's no lick of difference between either side. And that's just an easy excuse of why I'm not involved. I'm like, oh, so you're telling me if Bush and Trump would not have appointed any Supreme Court justices, we would have Heller, we'd have Bruen, we'd have McDonald? I don't think so. You can say both sides are bad. One's an F and one's an F minus, but you can't say, especially on the gun issue,
right,
that there's not a lick of difference between them. I mean, The current Justice Department, the current federal administration has just sued a state because of their violating the Second Amendment rights. I don't know, has that ever happened before?
Not that I was able to find.
So that easy, just why I'm not involved in. I remember you'd meet people. It's like, I'll tell you what, if this happens, there'll be a revolution. There'll be a revolution. I'm like, dude, you're not even registered to vote.
Yeah.
You won't do the easiest nonviolent thing
right.
that doesn't cost a penny, but you're wanting me to believe that, that you're ready to, it's all words. It's all words.
I definitely want to jump into your book. But before we do that, you brought up some of these organizations. I'm curious to know, is there a specific, or are there multiple firearm supporting organizations that you're a big fan of?
I'm a fan of the NRA, despite their history, despite their recent history and their mismanagement, all that, just because they're the big gorilla. Mm-hmm. And I hope they get straightened out. I'm a big fan of the Second Amendment Foundation. I learned about them when I started going to the Gun Rights Policy Conference in 1994. And again, I went almost every year for a couple of decades. I hadn't been in several years now. But at that time, early on, I just thought, they're a decent organization. They published some books written on like a fourth grade level. They put on a nice conference. But man, now, and I don't know if I wasn't paying attention or they really just started in the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years, really doing the heavy lifting on filing the lawsuits that are effective. Mm-hmm. And then Gun Owners of America. And I'm a life member of all of them.
Gotcha.
In my wet dream, all of these organizations would combine and join. We would have a fist and not a bunch of fingers. But I know that won't happen. But that would be if we all of them joined, and one specialized in lawsuits, and one specialized in training, and one specialized in litigation, but all of those I think are doing good work.
Yeah, in recently though, some of these lawsuits and some of these actions that are brought to court, I am seeing where the plaintiff is at times some of these organizations filing jointly, and I like seeing that.
Yeah, and there are some reasons sometimes where they make a decision that one organization will file it and will then jump on to support it. And there are sometimes reasons when they don't. I mean, good reasons, technical reasons, and all the stuff. It's crazy, but there are some good, intelligent people, lawyers, researchers, scholars that are behind this and giving a lot of their time that are just making things happen. We just got to keep doing it and keep supporting it.
I agree with you. We very often on this podcast encourage people to look into these organizations, support them, and joining these organizations is a great idea for more than just because it supports them doing what they do to fight for a civil liberty, but a lot of times when you're a part of the organization and they come out victorious in one of the cases, if you're a member, you then benefit from their victory directly.
Yeah, SAP is one of those because they were the plaintiffs on one of them. I can't remember which one it was. But just would how different do your liberties would they be in your state if every gun owner in Illinois registered to vote, stayed informed, and voted?
Oh, it'd be massive here in Illinois.
So you don't even have to donate a lot of money. You don't have to risk your life. You don't if you just register to vote. And staying informed now, everybody's got a phone, everybody's got the internet. If you'll just get off YouTube and TikTok long enough to, be informed a little bit. If
Correct.
Everybody would just register and vote, we could stop so much of this nonsense at the legislative level, and then we wouldn't need to spend all the money in the courts, which even if we win is going to delay righteousness happening for 2 to 6 to 8 years maybe.
Yeah, that's something that we regularly promote here is educate yourself, register to vote, and get to your balloting facility and cast a vote. There are so many firearm owners in Illinois, and I forget the percentages, shame on me, but it's remarkably low how many of them turn out to vote and actually make a difference.
Yep, it's sad.
It is. But what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, is you to tell us a little bit about your book. And then I know I started reading it, and then I've got a couple questions for you, if that's okay.
Sure. Well, the book's called First 30 Seconds. It was published in June of last year, so almost 11 months now. It sold over 5,400 copies on Amazon. It's maintained a 4.9 out of 5-star rating on Amazon and Goodreads. I wrote it again, a little over a year ago, after at that time about 18 years of study and research in the active shooter problem, and seeing that the country absolutely was blind to what obviously needed to be done to save lives. I got into studying the active shooter problem when I left a career in the active duty Army and then immediately started teaching public high school. And the dumbest private in the Army knows if someone is coming to shoot you, you do two things. You spread out and you shoot back. And the school I was in, and most schools in America, their policy is the exact opposite. If an active shooter comes here to shoot us, let's gather up in groups and don't shoot back, which is the worst possible thing you could do. And that's what I kept seeing nationwide, that schools are doing things that are easy to type and easy to drill. Their policy is so their drills are easy, not so they save lives. And so I spend most of my time now traveling the country, speaking to churches, schools, law enforcement agencies, and conferences for churches and schools and law enforcement agencies. But I wrote the book just to put a public record out there. And writing the book itself was easy because what's in the book I had been saying at presentations 2 to 5 times a month over and over and over for years. The hardest part about writing it was deciding what not to put in it, because I wanted it intentionally relatively short. I didn't want it much over 200 pages. I could have written 600 pages, but it would just been, full of a lot of interesting facts. But that's not why I wanted the book. I wanted it to show what we're doing wrong and what we can do to make it better. Better meaning fewer victims and fewer attacks in the future.
I gotcha. Like I said, I didn't get all the way through it yet. I'm 15 or 20% through the book, and I'm enjoying it so far. One of the things I took away pretty early on is that if there's an active shooter event at a school, it seems as though the priority was to account for the students, and that's a priority. And the discovery that you made during, or when you discovered that that was the priority very early on in that educational position you took, it seemed as though you were baffled because the priority should be safety and saving lives. But what the question that came to my mind was, do you think that the schools develop that priority on their own, or do you think that that is coming down as a recommendation from a different organization or from something specific where being able to account for the students was the priority?
Well, it's not really the accountability. So I had cultural whiplash after 24 years active duty in the Army, and I was in armor tank, so units that fight other people and get fought. So 24 years of planning to manage and control and war game and analyze violence. That's what I did for 24 years. 10 days after I retire, I'm cultural whiplash. I'm in an organization where we don't even talk about violence ever. So it wasn't that and it isn't that the people leading the schools are stupid. It's that they have no training, no stomach, and no experience for violence. So things that we don't like to do, we outsource. If you don't want to get your hands all greasy and oily changing the oil of your car, you go to Jiffy Lube. If you don't want to get grass cuttings and sweat all over your legs, you hire somebody to come cut your lawn for you. Well, the schools do not want to deal with violence, so they outsource it to the cops. So the government, federal government, DHS, for 40 years has been saying run, hide, fight, which is the second worst thing to do. The worst thing is lockdown drill. And that's the thing that a lot of schools do because it's the easiest type, it's the easiest drill, and it's the best for accountability because everyone stays where they are until the drill's over, and then you go back to teaching. It only disrupts the education day 5 to 10 minutes at the most. So the government is telling them to do that, and the major consulting firms that make big money come and tell them that. If you want to make a lot of money teaching schools about active shooters, you go in and you tell them what they want to hear, which is you're doing the exact right thing. Stay in your classroom, lock the door, pull down the shade, and you will be fine until the cops come deal with this violent stuff. And that's what they get told, and that's what they do. But then, like in Parkland, when the shooter is shooting through the door into the classroom from the hall and shooting kids, then they're like, well, wait a minute. We were told if we stayed in the classroom, we'd be okay. But that's a lie. It's a bold lie. So the title of the book, First 30 Seconds, is because there are outliers. There are really fast shooters and there's really slow shooters. But there's a pretty good average of what you can expect from active shooters. And it's not just schools. It's anywhere. But the only way to have an expectation mathematically of ending the attack with less than 10 victims, 0 to 9, single-digit victims, is he has to be stopped in the first 30 seconds. And that's not a guarantee, but it's about a 90% solution. And there is no way physically to communicate with someone who's not at the attack site once it starts and then get them to the attack site within 30 seconds. So the math is very clear, but it gives us a very uncomfortable conclusion that we don't like, which is the victims are going to have to counterattack and stop this if we want to cause a low victim count. Now, if you wait on the cops, they'll stop it. You're just not going to like the victim count. And schools don't really like hearing that in most places because it's something they don't want to do. They outsource it.
That's really interesting. My brain's firing in all kinds of places.
No, but I mean, I've mentioned in the book my experience when I was told we were doing the lockdown drill, and I said, well, I got a first floor classroom with a 4-foot by 4-foot window. I teach 11th graders. Man, if he's shooting somewhere in this building, why don't I open this window and let these 11th graders jump out of the window and run? And the assistant principal in charge of security looked at me, and he's a good guy, good man. He looked me square in the face and said, Ed, we can't have the kids running. It would take hours to find them. So yeah, the what they were used to was accountability. They weren't used to violence. They'd never planned for violence, didn't want to plan for violence. So they were still stuck on normal days. But when the attack starts, I call it opposite day. It's not that day anymore. Right. So what used to be important is not important anymore. What we used to prohibit, we now encourage. We used to play checkers. Once the first shot's fired, we're playing rugby. It's a completely different game with completely different rules.
I find this very intriguing because I've learned a lot since I've met Leigh and we've started doing this podcast, and he has enlightened me on so many things. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is if you are moving, you are a lot less likely to be shot. And if you are fleeing, you're a lot less likely to be a victim. So when my kids were in high school, I went over it with them and I told them that if there is ever an active shooter at your school, I know what the school is telling you to do, but take a chair, break a window, get out, and start running. And I will deal with the repercussions of whatever the result of that action may be. But I've learned that huddling in the corner is one of the worst things that you can do.
Other than pulling your own gun and shooting your own kids for the active shooter, you cannot make his job easier than gathering them all in the corner. And that's what I was being told to do as a 42-year-old retired colonel, but a snot-nosed brand new teacher. This is the best. And this is 2007. So we'd had school shootings for 3 decades at this point. It wasn't new. And in 3 decades of school shootings, this was the best that the best minds with master's and PhD degrees could come up with, was making the active shooter's job easier. So being an accomplice to our own murder was the school's plan.
Ed, we've got a similar background. I didn't do 24 years. I did 12 years of the military, and I've been a teacher now for 20 years. And currently,
what do you teach?
I teach social studies to bilingual kids.
You're a handsome guy then, because all social studies teachers are really handsome.
That's right, damn good looking. But yeah, so I'm curious, how was your comments received by the AP in charge of security? How did that go over?
Not well. And I didn't, when I didn't speak up in the first days before the kids show up, when they're telling everybody, reminding them, and I'm learning for the first time what the policy was. But I waited till later, talked to him individually. And again, I said, instead of just waiting for him to come and see if he comes to my classroom to kill my kids, why can't we run? And in just a few seconds, we'll be unable to be shot if we run. And I got told, no, it would take hours. We can't have a policy that the people run. And I said, okay, well, if the policy is we have to stay in the room, and I would not have followed that policy, but if that's the policy, instead of bunching up in the far corner where he comes in the door and we're all bunched up, I'm teaching 11th graders here. I got football players in every class. How about me on one side of the door, a linebacker on the other? We have a welcoming party for him. If he tries, I was told, we cannot have a policy that we fight
running.
back.
Yeah.
Because our insurance would go up.
Yeah.
And so they know accountability and they know budgeting. Those are 2 things that are very serious every day in the land of public education. So that's what they were focused on, not managing violence to minimize the number of people shot. And that's what managing combat is. There's no good plan in combat. It's not, we're going to get in a pretty tough combat fight tomorrow and all of us are going to be okay. Some of us are going to get hurt. So the magic is, how do I manage it so that the fewest of us get hurt, and those few that get hurt get immediate medical attention? That's managing combat, and that's what an active shooter attack is.
Do you think some of the schools are reluctant to implement that type of training because they essentially need to check the box to say, yes, we have a program in place, but they're not really concerned that it might actually happen there? So if they check the box, then they can answer to whether it's this, a state regulation. They can say, yes, we have our program in place, but they're not really worried about the accuracy of the program because they just think it won't happen at their school.
Oh, yes. And they're right. I mean, the chances of your school, if you're a principal or a superintendent, the chances of one of your schools is almost zero, but it's not zero. Some, there's several every year that get attacked. So sure, I'm only going to be superintendent here. How many more years? Run the numbers. What are the odds? If I do something that's probably going to save lives, it's going to be controversial. I got social media exploding. I got the news media calling. I got angry parents calling. Makes my life a lot more difficult as a superintendent. If I just keep this boat going in the direction it's going for the how many every years I'm going to be superintendent here, my life is easier. So yeah, the state requires a plan. So we have some plan that was created, a model plan for the state. We have it with our name on it in tab C of the safety book. We're required to do training every year. It doesn't say what, it doesn't have to be good training. It's just some kind of training. So I have schools that I've done earlier, when I first started doing this, I've had schools that I would do for free. And I did do for free, but then after they had me for a couple of years, they started paying one of the big companies many thousands of dollars to come in because they paid them to come tell them what they wanted to hear, which is, you're exactly right. Stay in the classroom, pull down the shade, turn out the lights, and you'll be fine. And so they didn't want to hear, this is going to be ugly, brutal, and violent. Some people are going to get shot. Some people are going to die. You're going to have to be brutally, viciously violent against him in a counterattack if you want to have a low number of victims. And they don't want to hear that. Some of them. Now, some of them do. Some of them respond well. Some of them get creative. I was just up in Iowa, and their law allows armed school staff, but there's a weird technicality right now they're trying to overcome, which is preventing them. So the principal said, every staff member that wants to, I'll buy you a baseball bat with the school logo on it. And so that's a spirit thing to have in the classroom. Yay, Eagles. And that's not their real mascot, but yay, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But on opposite day, we're going to hit him in the head and the throat with it when he comes through our door.
Yeah.
Gotcha. But so you have had a certain percentage of these schools accept what you're telling them in a positive manner, where they've wanted to be educated and embrace what you're teaching them.
Yeah, and as I say in the book, I live for small victories. So I'm not going to go speak to a New York City public school and have them go, we have seen Jesus. We're going to all buy, have guns tomorrow. But if I can get them, so the first big inertia break is if they're a lockdown school. If I can get them to change from everybody must do what we tell them to do to everybody makes their own decision. If I can get them to do that, that is huge. And the staff loves that when they do that, because then they can get creative. They don't have to do what the intercom tells them to do. They say, I tell them, you got 3 options. They're all going to be bad. Optimize them now so that when the attack happens, you can choose which one is least bad. And so we see things like they'll move bookshelves around so that they have ballistic protection. They don't know that's what it's called, but they'll move full bookshelves to where it will protect bullets coming through the walls into their classrooms. They'll bring in baseball bats and pieces of driftwood and other weapons to fight. They'll bring in tools to break windows. They'll bring in pads to throw outside the broken second-story windows so kids won't hit the hard ground. They'll hit the pad. They'll start getting creative once they're told, you figured out. You figured out, you make it better.
Do I assume correctly that you are in favor of allowing teachers to be armed in the classroom?
Well, yeah, I'm for a quick counterattack. I'm for a quick counterattack by either the students or the staff. The gun is not the only way to do that, but is by far the most efficient. I tell them, if a cop gets told there's an active shooter in a school, when that cop comes in that school, if he's in uniform, he's got like 10 different tools on him. He's got batons and tasers and pepper spray and cuffs. But I guarantee you which one of those tools he'll have in his hand. I guarantee you. Bet all my money on it. Because it's not the only way, but it's by far the best way. So if it's legal, what I tell them is you need to get the best legal tool you can have. So if the gun is legal, that is by far the best thing to have. That's what the cops are going to use when they get here in 6 to 12 minutes. So it'll also work in the first 30 seconds, but somebody here has to have it. But what I tell them is what you fight them with is debatable. It is negotiable. But the fact you, the victims, have to fight him is not mathematically debatable. So if the gun is legal, that would be the best way. But if by law or policy you're not going to have guns, it doesn't alleviate your responsibility to fight. So bring in the best legal tool. So just in the last 10 months now, again, small victories. The last 10 months, we've had 6 attacks where the victims quickly counterattacked and stopped it with very low numbers. 2 of those were with guns at Cross Point Church in Michigan and a synagogue in Michigan, 2 houses of worship in Michigan.
Yep.
But the other 4 were without guns. A country club in New Hampshire, they tackled him. A high school hockey game in Rhode Island, they tackled him. We just saw last month in April, a high school principal attack and grab and tackle a shooter inside his school. Ended with 1 victim. That principal got shot in the leg. No telling how many it would have been had they waited on the cops. And then Old Dominion University, cadets attacked that guy unarmed, had a knife. One of them had a knife. But so what you attack him with is debatable. It's negotiable. But we gotta fight back quickly, and it works. And that's what we got to do.
Well, Leigh can correct me if I recall this in error, but because he's done a lot of study on some of this violence and whatnot. But if I recall correctly, he told me at one point, most active shooters, once they encounter resistance, they almost give up. They are there. Do I recall that correctly?
Yeah, no, you're right on the money. I think and Ed, you're probably more up to date, far more up to date on this stuff than I am. But generally they don't have a plan for after, right? They're become very nihilistic, and it's almost like a suicide event. And so the idea that there's going to be some kind of fight afterward is not really what they're thinking about. They're thinking about sort of a blaze of glory. And it sort of tends to be that the first person who sort of puts their hands on them they sort of go limp.
That's a trend that has changed a little. If I was teaching 15 years ago, I would say it was an 80 to 90% chance. Once they realized somebody was there with a gun to confront them, they would shoot themselves. Now it's about 50 to 60%. But when I talk to armed citizens, that's still over half that you won't even have to clean your gun.
Yep.
If you just go confront them. And so they're scary and they're deadly because they're going to attack a place where they think they're the only ones that can hurt people till the cop gets there. They're hoping, what they're planning to do is attack a place full of cockroaches. And what cockroaches do when you lift up the trash can is they either freeze or they run.
Yep.
That's the two things. And either or both the stomp, and they're both easy to shoot. So they're king on the court because they're the only ones there with a gun, and they think they're the only ones there that can hurt people. So the two reasons counterattacking them is so successful is they are not expecting it. They know the cops will counterattack them in 6 to 12 minutes, but they wouldn't have come here if they thought one of the victims would have counterattacked.
Yes.
And two, thank God, so far they haven't been John Wick, they haven't been Navy SEALs, they haven't been IPSC master level shooters. They're usually a punk that stole dad's gun yesterday, or they bought a gun 4 days ago, and they barely know how to make it go bang. The fact that they can make it go bang, that makes them extremely deadly, but they are not tough to fight.
And even if they had been sort of highly trained John Wick types, the fact that the OODA loop and the fact that they're usually inside of a building so close to someone that they may have not perceived means that if that person had just gone after them, that the likelihood, and that's that 30 seconds, right? If they're having to deal with other inputs on them, then they're less focused on what they want to be doing, which is shooting fish in a barrel.
Yeah, and not all, but most of these attacks start inside, or they start outside and transition inside. So if they've been shooting a gun, and most active shooters start with a long gun, if they've been shooting a rifle or a shotgun inside of a building, their hearing is screwed. Plus, auditory exclusion works for the bad guy like it does for us.
Yep.
So coming through a doorway, if you watch Parkland, if you watch Uvalde, if you watch a bunch of the videos, Pulse nightclub, they walk back and forth in their attack. So they will eventually turn their back on you. And running up behind them, they probably aren't going to hear you because they've been shooting a gun inside. And yeah, they got a rifle that can shoot 300 yards. But if you wait on the inside of a doorway, when they come in, they won't see you till they're 2 foot from you. And so you're taking away some of the advantages of their weapon. And so that's what we teach people when we go in there. It's like hot pot of coffee in the face, baseball bat to the throat, tackle them, whatever. But they're not expecting it. They're not MMA champions at all.
I think when I first got into the self-protection business, I was very lucky to participate in a national level training out in Las Vegas, and I want to say the trainer last name was Giannetti, if I'm remembering right, and he did an active shooter scenarios and recommendations very similar to what we're talking about here. And he had 3 role players who had simunitions, and they did 3 separate attacks at random times during the seminar. And basically the rule of thumb was whoever's nearest to them, just get your hands on them and wrap them up, and then everyone else is just like a magnet. First person wraps them up, and then everyone else does the same. And the casualty numbers were like single digit every time. 2-3 people, and they're stopped.
Yep, and I think that should be our goal. And they're not going to go out in the middle of the desert to do these attacks. They want a high body count, so they're going to come to a crowded public place.
Yep.
Usually there's at least 50, probably more victims there. So out of a population in America, and I don't care if it's a school, a restaurant, a mall, a church, out of 50 Americans, there's 1, 2, or 3 that are mentally and physically capable of doing deadly, ruthless violence. So just tell them ahead of time, we want you to. We don't, everybody doesn't have to fight. Everybody doesn't fight. We just need 1 or 2, and that's enough. But they need to be ready to do that. And I don't care who does it. I don't care if it's a 16-year-old student, 40-year-old staff member, or a cop. I don't care how you do it. I don't care if you shoot them, tackle them, hot coffee in the face, pepper spray in the face. I care about how quickly it's done, because the time, how quickly it's done, not who does it or with what kind of weapon, will determine how many victims we have when it's over.
And that's one of the biggest mitigating factors, is that response time of a reaction.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
in the first minute, an average active shooter in the first minute is going to shoot a new victim every 3 to 5 seconds.
Wow.
Even an untrained, low-skilled punk who, again, stole a gun yesterday or bought one 4 days ago, they're going to come to a place where they're going to start shooting. No one's expecting it. So a lot of people are going to freeze. There's going to be both denial and shock. And then some will start running, but they're going to attack a crowded public place. So it's very easy for even a low-skill, untrained person to go from their first victim to their second victim to their third victim to their fourth victim in that first minute. So given that rate, that's why we have to stop them within the first 30 seconds to have an expectation of a low victim count. You know, if I'd have written a book that said, hey, if your kitchen wall catches on fire when you're cooking, if you grab a fire extinguisher and put it out in 20 seconds, you'll have a lot less damage than if you call 911. They call the fire department. The fire department. No one would buy that book because they're like that.
That's crazy talk.
That's blatantly obvious. Why would you write a book? But we're not seeing that blatantly obvious math with the active shooter. Or maybe we are, but we just don't like what it tells us to do.
Yeah.
I'm inclined to believe that it's more the latter, because there's a lot of people that don't even like to have the discussion of what the results could be, let alone what to do in that case. If they start mentally putting themselves in that situation, it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah, and so they're trying to make corrections around the edges. They won't do what math clearly tells us we have to do, and that's to get ready to be extremely violent. So the school's attempt to beat the clock is a school resource officer. Well, you know, the reason it takes the cops so long to get here is somebody has to realize the attack's going on, feel safe enough to access a phone, make the phone call, tell the operator, then the operator radios the cops, and the cops have to drive there, and that takes a long time. Mm-hmm. So we'll just beat that by having a cop already here. We call them school resource officers. We'll have one cop on this huge campus. Well, active shooters are a subset of all violent criminals, and violent criminals really try hard not to start their violence right in front of a cop.
Yep.
Right.
So I can show a slide with 14 schools that were attacked by current students of that school who knew the school had an SRO, or in 2 cases, 2 SROs. And they attacked anyway because they're just going to attack in a different part of school. They're going to attack in a different floor of the building, a different part of campus. So, yeah, you got a uniformed cop walking around somewhere, but they're not going to hear or see the first shot. So even now they have to wait on a radio call, which by the time the cops get a radio call, there's probably plus or minus 20 people already shot. So having a cop somewhere on your campus is not going to give you a low victim count unless the shooter is stupid or unlucky enough to start the attack right in front of the cop. On average, there's almost always 10 or more people shot before the first 911 call is heard.
Wow.
So if the cop on campus doesn't hear or see the first shot, the SRO on campus in uniform is not going to give you a low victim count. And that's even if that cop acts very aggressively.
Yeah. You're already in the double digits before anybody's even notified, possibly.
Yep.
That's interesting. That's very intriguing. I don't know if you cover this in your book because, like I said, I haven't gotten all the way through it yet. And maybe you don't cover it, but I am curious. Do you think the biggest motivation for an active shooter to create the scenario they do is for the notoriety?
Yes.
So how do we remove some of that motivation? Do we stop putting the active shooter's name and face in all the media after it's created, and then we don't know who it was, and then they stop chasing that notoriety? Or
I don't think we can do that. There's a whole organization out there called Don't Say Their Name. And for that reason, and then they'll say don't ever show their photo. But when I'm training cops and armed citizens, I show the photos because I think one of the things we have to get past is you may have to shoot a 13-year-old. If you're a cop going into a middle school, there's over 90% chance the shooter is one of your own, a current student.
Right.
So we got to get past. We got to understand that we may be. I'm not proud of it, but my home state here of Arkansas has the youngest school shooter at 11 years old. The Jonesboro shooters were 11 and 13.
11 and 13.
But yeah, because I have 3 cell phone videos that the Parkland shooter made of himself in the weeks leading up to his attack, and one of his statements is, "When you see me on the news, you'll all know who I am." The Seattle, no, this was the Apunqua, a community college in Oregon. I'm probably messing up the name, but he left a manifesto, and it was written kind of eloquently. He said, "A man known by no one will, in one day, everybody in the world will now know." And that's what it is. By every measurable standard, I'm an absolute loser and failure at life.
Yeah.
But if I go shoot 30 people, tomorrow everybody in the world with an internet connection will know who I am. I think the more realistic way is we stop them after they've shot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. And so if you look at the shootings, I cover the Chardon, Ohio shooting for a specific reason when I talk with schools, but no one's ever heard of that because he only shot 6 people. The ones with low victim counts don't get near the notoriety of the ones that get 34 or 38, which was Parkland and Uvalde, or, Pulse was 102.
So keeping the victim count low serves a couple really positive purposes. Obviously, one being that there's that many less victims, but then the other is that it just doesn't garner as much attention and alleviates that notoriety.
Yeah, and if the shooter thinks that it won't last long if I go there, I won't get a high victim count because it won't last long, then I'm not going to say he won't do an attack, but he's going to attack somewhere else. It'll divert the attack. Because the reason they're doing it, if you go into Chicago tonight and shoot one person, you'll make the Chicago news, but you probably won't even make the Springfield, Illinois news.
Right.
But if you go into Chicago tonight and shoot 30 people, everybody in the world tomorrow will know you if you leave a manifesto or any videos or everything you've ever posted on social media. Yeah, and if you do it good enough, like Columbine, every year they'll celebrate. Other shooters will celebrate your shooting and bring it up.
That all lends itself to getting rid of these gun-free zones.
Of course.
Because I forget the percentage, but it's remarkably high how many.
Yeah, and with more and more states now having concealed carry, the places they can go and have a high expectation of no one shooting back is getting lower and lower. But like schools and courthouses, and that schools are almost always gun-free zones. Yeah. But, you can show places where, like Pulse, most cops know now, but most citizens still don't, that Pulse had nothing to do with gay. What came out with, these radical Muslims hate gays. He went and shot a gay nightclub. Round peg fit perfectly in a round hole, but it had nothing to do with gay. His only intended target was Disney World, but he went there and they had a bunch of armed security. So he called an audible at the line of scrimmage and backed out. And he Googled nightclubs in Orlando. And Pulse wasn't the first one it gave him. He went to the first nightclub after he left Disneyland. They got a video of, they got his Google. They know what he Googled on his phone in the parking lot. Why he Googled nightclubs and not malls or churches, or I don't know, but he goes to the first club Google gave him, and they have a marked police car sitting outside. He drives right past it, doesn't even stop. Then he goes to the second club Google gave him, which was Pulse. I didn't know that. It's never a foolproof. It's like if you have a cop car here, you have armed security here, they will not stop. 2 radical Islam terrorists with body armor and rifles pulled up right next to Officer Greg Stevens in Garland, Texas, and started shooting. He shot and killed both of them. They probably weren't expecting that. So having armed people is not a guarantee, but I can show many examples of where the shooter relocated, chose to go to a different location because he knew or suspected there would be armed resistance there.
No doubt.
That's I just learned something that's very interesting to me. I never knew that about Paul's nightclub. I didn't know that wasn't his initial target, and I didn't know that there was possible target in between the initial target that ended up not panning out for him.
Yeah, and Pulse paid an off-duty cop to be there just like that first club did, but that cop's job during the day on duty was interdiction of drugs on the interstate, so he was given an unmarked car, which was parked in the parking lot of Pulse at that time, but it looked like a regular car. And he was a block and a half away writing underage drinking tickets. So that's why there was no cop in the club when the shooter went in and started shooting it up.
That's very interesting.
But even in gun-friendly places like Florida, there are still gun-free zones like schools. And I don't know if at that time in Florida, but a lot of states that have concealed carry, places that serve alcohol by the drink are prohibited places. Mm-hmm. You can't carry, even though you've got a license. Even if you don't drink, you can't carry there.
Right.
I don't know if that was the case in Florida at the time of Pulse, but that's another problem that we have.
Yeah. Sorry, you caught me in the middle of a thought there.
You should see our faces here.
Yeah. I'm learning.
Yeah, there was a Isla Vista shooter out in California. He left a 141-page manifesto. He was going to shoot an annual spring break festival where they closed down this busy street, blocked it off, rides and vendors and food during spring break. But then he said in his manifesto, I looked at YouTube videos of past year's festivals, and there were cops everywhere. So there's no way I could get the number that I need. So he ended up going to a college. So there's several cases of where they diverted because they thought in their original idea they would get counterattack quickly. So they picked a place where they didn't think they'd be counterattacked.
That's interesting. So it basically, a lot of these active shooters, for whatever reason, it's a volume game. They're looking for a high victim count. And if they think that a particular target is not going to allow that, then they'll pivot and find a different one.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, just
I never looked. I guess I never looked at it through that set of glasses.
yeah, just a basic military. You try really hard not to attack the strongest part of your opponent's defense. You attack where there's a weakness.
But I guess that's where that military training and mindset that you're applying, to society. I never served in the military, so that train of thought never developed for me. But that's very interesting.
Yeah, and wargaming. I mean, once you made what you thought was the best plan, you wargamed it against a thinking, motivated, adaptive, creative enemy. And so, that enemy did what you would do if you were in their shoes to try to win. And I'll go to schools and they'll say, but we lock our doors. Oh, really? What about the glass in the door?
Right.
And this is in the book, right? This is shortly after Uvalde, which is when my dance card got really full. I get my phone rang off the hook after Uvalde. I go down to the school, and I went to the high school first. They were very proud. They had an emergency school board meeting the day or two after Uvalde, and the school board had just granted all kinds of emergency funding for what we call security theater. They called it school security, but we call it security theater. You buy stuff that makes you feel like you're safer, but you're actually not. Yeah. So they had done research, they said, in detailed, intense research, and they had found this lock. They called it the super lock. It was about the size of a small shoebox. And they put it on all exterior doors of all the buildings of their high school. But all their exterior doors had a cross beam that this super lock had been installed on, but there was a glass panel on top and a glass panel on bottom. And I said, you don't think he'd just shoot through the glass? And the principal just blinked at me. He's like, well, we bought the lock, so we're good. He's like, no. What's coming is a thinking, motivated, adaptive, creative enemy. He's going to shoot through the glass. Yeah. By the way, you're at a high school, over 90% chance your shooter's already in your building. He's one of your own students, well over 90% of the time. Yep. So that super lock is only going to delay cops and EMSs. They're not thinking this through. Schools like a bumper sticker, one-size-fits-all, cookie-cutter slogan to make their plan off of. And so they build higher fences. Well, if it's a middle or a high school, over 90% chance your shooter's not only already within that fence, he's already in your building. They buy security cameras, which are good for every other problem. The drug dealer, the bully, the vapor, every other problem, vandal you have on a school, they don't want to get caught. They don't want to be on camera. The active shooter wants to be on camera. He's doing this to get famous.
Right. By the time anyone's looking at that, it's after the fact.
Yeah, and that'll go on 7:00 news tonight. And in fact, a lot of them aren't even happy with the security camera, so they'll either wear a GoPro or they'll put their smartphone in a shirt pocket or in a magazine pocket of a tactical vest, so that they video their own attack. So they make sure. Metal detectors, Red Lake, and in a school, metal detectors will stop some things, like the thuglet that just wants to wear a gun every day for status. But in Red Lake High School, the student of the high school drove right up to the front door, walked right in the front door where he knew the metal detector was, and shot the guard at the metal detector, and then walked right by the metal detector. Because what's coming is a creative, thinking, adaptive, motivated enemy. And it's like flag on the play. You're not allowed to do that. Back up, restart the attack. You're not allowed to shoot the guard at the metal detector.
Right.
And that's more security theater. When the staff and the students came every day, they probably thought, once we get on the other side of the metal detector, we're safe. Nothing can touch us. But that's not true.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot, Ed. It's very intriguing, and I bet there's a lot of people that are listening that are in the same situation mentally that I am, and it's just different scenarios running through their head that maybe they didn't consider before. Yeah, and so there was an organization started after Sandy Hook attack, which I think was 2012, 2013, an elementary school in Connecticut. It's called the Sandy Hook Promise, and they've been putting out, there's this quote from them that a lot of the major trainers use and the government uses that says something to the effect of, no locked classroom door has ever been breached. And that's to make people think, well, that's 100% effectiveness. If I stay behind a locked classroom door, I'll always be safe. Well,
If I shoot through the door and the walls and hit all your kids in the room, but I never break the lock on the door, then the door hasn't been breached. The lock hasn't been breached. If I shoot the glass next to the door, reach in and unlock it from the inside, the lock wasn't breached. It operated exactly as it was designed to operate.
The door's just not locked anymore.
Exactly. But what it's a false sense of hope of, my goodness, that means 100% of the time, if we just stay in our locked classroom, we'll be safe. And that's not true. The Parkland shooter shot 24 people on the first floor in a minute and a half. If you run the numbers, that's a new victim every 3.75 seconds. So that falls right in the every 3 to 5 second mark. 18 of those 24 that he shot in the first floor were inside their classrooms behind locked doors. The shooter simply shot through the doors of 3 of the 10 classrooms. Now, he could have also shot through the walls because they were drywall, but he didn't. He only shot through 3 classroom doors and got 18 kids inside of classrooms. He never entered a classroom. But we're still telling teachers, if you stay in your, like they told me, if you stay in your classroom with your door locked, then everything will be okay until the cops get there. And it's just wrong. It's just horribly wrong. And then, so we're doing this lockdown, and I'll go to a high school and I'll say, what's your plan? Lockdown drill. Okay, take me to your cafeteria and show me how it works in your cafeteria. Well, it's not really for the cafeteria. Well, but most high school attacks start in the cafeteria. So take me to your cafeteria and show me what your plan is. And they don't have one. With elementaries, it's the playground. We had 4 elementary schools where the kids and staff were shot on the playground. Well, we have a lockdown drill. Show me how that lockdown drill saves our kids' lives on the playground. Well, it doesn't. They don't have a plan for the playground because that's too hard. They just have this government-approved, consultant-confirmed, easy-to-drill thing called the lockdown that they're all still doing. And it works flawlessly. Every day the shooter doesn't show up, but it gets us killed the day he does show up.
Wow.
Who when you wrote your book, who did you have, what motivated you? Like, who did you have in mind that you wanted to read that book, and what did you want them to do?
Oh, everybody. To implement what math tells us we have to do, which is we have to tell everybody you have 3 options. They will all be bad. There is no good option here. Okay. This is not a choice between ice cream and cheesecake. There's 3 bad options, and the options should be considered in this order: fight, flee, barricade. Fight should be first. The government says run, hide, fight. Fight only as the last resort. That's crazy mathematically. The sooner somebody fights the active shooter, the fewer humans will be shot. So somebody fighting quickly is the best for humanity. Fight, flee, barricade. Everybody makes their own choice. And fight and flee are really the only 2 choices. You would never barricade if you had the option to flee. But parents of school-age children, faculty and staff in school, principals, administrators, school boards, church leaders, church security teams, cops, business owners, legislators, city councils, state legislatures, federal legislatures, all those people. And so from the military perspective, when I was a tank company commander, I was a captain. I was the highest ranking individual in my company, but I commanded one of our 14 tanks. So I was on a tank with a sergeant and 2 privates. So even though I had the highest rank, if my tank got hit, I paid the same price as the 2 privates and the sergeant paid. So I had skin in the game. The problem with schools is the people that make the decisions that truly matter are at the school board, superintendent, and state legislature level. They're not getting shot at. So no matter how horrible of a plan, policy that they put in place, the people who will pay the price for that are the principals and below. They're the ones that are going to get shot. So the people that's making the choices aren't paying the price for the bad choices. Here in Arkansas, our legislature meets every other year, odd-numbered years. And our legislature doesn't have one cop, like one school resource officer for a big campus. Our state legislature has an entire Capitol Police Department protecting it. And when the legislature is in session, they augment it with extra state troopers. So they absolutely know what it takes to have adequate protection. It's a lot of armed people at the entrances and roaming around ready to react. But the people making the laws and the rules in most states say it's perfectly fine if there's one cop on a huge high school campus. That's adequate protection. And of course it's not.
No, it isn't. And I just want to throw this out there. One of the ideas I've had, and obviously I think it's a great idea, is that, around these schools, there are a lot of either current or former military or police trained people that are at retirement age that like to walk. And you hire those people to just walk around the school, be armed. obviously concealed is I think would be the way to go. But to have a couple people just roaming around the school that are willing to intervene if something is required, give them a very modest salary that's tax free. And what grandpa or father wouldn't want to walk around and help keep his community safe, earn a few bucks while walking around and, getting some good steps in. But just adding a few of those people to each school at a minimum cost, I don't think would ever be a bad idea.
No, and it could be at no cost. The most obvious option that would give us the best results at the least price, they've refused to consider. So when I grew up here in my city that I'm in now, when I grew up as a young child, we had one paid town marshal, but we had 12 volunteer cops called our auxiliary cops, and they were fathers of people I knew. Mm-hmm. They volunteered, they didn't get paid, they had uniforms and stuff. So a lot of times people say we need military veterans in the schools. Well, hell, a veteran could be a guy that did 2 years in the Naval Reserve in Nebraska. So veteran, and I are one, but I mean, just saying veteran, every time we say veteran, some people think, well, that means you've had 4 trips to Fallujah in major combat. No.
Right.
And even if you had it with a rifle and not with a pistol. So yeah, shooting a handgun is not a police specific task. Sure, cops do it, but so do a whole bunch of people without badges.
Right.
Cops drive cars, but a whole bunch of other people drive cars. Cops talk on radios, but a whole bunch of other people talk on radios. So shooting a pistol and hitting a mammal is just lining up 2 things and pulling a lever. Humans have been hunting large mammals with guns for hundreds of years without badges. It's called hunting. So all we need is grandfathers, uncles, fathers. They could be volunteer if they pay them. I don't care. Just they don't have to be there all the time. They just show up and walk through. Instead of going and walking at the mall, you just go and walk through the high school or walk through the elementary school or sit out on the playground. You just show up. Granddad shows up during the 3 recess periods at the playground where the kids are vulnerable. Out on the playground. But yeah, it's there. That's the obvious solution. So if you've seen the video of Jack Wilson, the guy pulled a shotgun in his sanctuary, and in less than 3 seconds, Jack Wilson drew his handgun and shot and killed him.
I recall this.
So I show this meme that has this woman with this kind of quizzitive look saying, what can we possibly do to stop the active shooters? And then the little girl's face pops up and says, well, shooting them through the head seemed to work pretty well. Yeah. So it's not like we don't know what works. Jack Wilson, Gina Som, Humberto Garcia, Eli Dicken, Vic Stacy, Pastor David George, Officer Greg Stevens, we absolutely know what works. The problem is we just don't have the stomach in some cases to do what we absolutely know works.
Well, I agree with you in a certain regard. I also feel very strongly that, yes, we know what works, but there's a lot of people that are willing to do that. We're just not allowed to be able to put in the position to be able to do it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, school staff, and they call it arming teachers. It's not just teachers. It's janitors, It's custodian. It's not what their title is. We need them spread out. So no matter where the attack starts, at least one of our armed people, preferably 2 for redundancy, would hear it and see it and could react. And so arming teachers is a political term like assault weapon, Saturday night special, cop killer bullet. Right. It was designed to bring up negative images of the assistant principal walking around campus with a box full of Glocks, throwing them to people going, here, take yours, take yours.
Right.
Take yours. But it's actually what's being suggested is a very passive thing. We're not going to arm anybody. We're just going to stop disarming them. Right. Any school staff member who would volunteer to thank you for risking your life. You'd volunteer to protect us all on campus. They're already carrying everywhere else. They're carrying at Walmart. They're carrying at the grocery store. They're carrying at the doctor's office. Right. They're carrying at the oil changing place, the pharmacy, the dry cleaner. It's just now before they walk onto campus, they have to disarm. So we're not arming anybody. We're just going to stop disarming them in this one little location. They're carrying everywhere else, and it's not a problem. It's not causing any problems everywhere else. So we're just going to let them carry and not disarm them when they come on school. And that's no cost. It's no additional cost. It doesn't need government bureaucracy. And that's the immediate thing government wants to do is pass some kind of new bureaucracy and new rules and new money. And all they just have to do is let it happen.
Well, the negative disposition always has to get brought up by somebody that's anti-gun, because I've had this conversation and I've been met with, oh, you want to take a 59-year-old lady that weighs 120 pounds and you want to make her carry a gun. It's hard enough to be a teacher as it is, and now you want to make her be the security guard. And to me, it's such a innocuous argument, because nobody's saying make a teacher carry a gun. They're saying, like you said, allow them to. I know all sorts of individuals that either are or have been teachers that if there were an active shooter there, they're one of the first people you want to encounter that person, because they're already at the range on the weekends. They're already training for personal protection anyway.
Yeah, it's I call, when you get in my book, it's the boogeyman arguments. So there is no perfect. I'm not offering any solution that's perfect. So if you don't want the most obvious solution that gives the best results, you find fault with it and risk with it, and there is, and you just harp on that. My brother, Mike Monk, taught high school for 28 years as an English teacher. The last 2 years that he taught, he was a part-time police officer here in this city. So the last 2 years he taught English. He could legally carry a gun in the school. Now, Mike's also a master level IDPA shooter, which people that don't know what that means, it means he's wicked fast and accurate with a pistol.
Right.
So he would have been the same protection as a teacher, protecting those kids before he got this magical badge,
Right.
and took this oath. He had the same skill and the same character before the last 2 years when he could legally carry in the school. And they would have had that same protection with no additional money. They were paying him as a teacher, but not for anything else. And in fact, when he retired, he became a full-time cop and came back to the school as an SRO. So in the book, I talk about boogeyman arguments. So they're going to go, come on, guns on a school campus, that's a horrible idea. So I'm like, oh, so you don't have an SRO? Oh, yeah, we have an SRO. And you don't let the SRO carry a gun? Oh, well, yeah, the SRO has a gun. Oh, so guns on campus aren't a bad idea.
Right. Right.
Well, when the active shooter starts shooting your kids, who are you going to call? You're going to call the dog catcher, the fireman, the county assessor, the tax. There's a whole bunch of government employees you could call. But you're going to be screaming into the phone, begging for the one government employee that you know has a pistol. So you know what the solution to this problem is. That's what you're going to be screaming into the phone for. I would just rather have the solution there in the first 15 seconds than wait 6 to 12 minutes for it. So they all know what the solution is. They're just willing to wait on it, which means they're willing to let a lot of kids get shot.
Yeah.
And so then they'll say, well, school employees don't have police training. Well, guess what, Sparky? You don't need police training. Give you a whole list of armed citizens who have a perfect safety record so far and a much better accuracy record than cops with no police training. But the one SRO that didn't go into Parkland had over 20 years police training, and the 8 deputies altogether that didn't go into Parkland, that refused to go in, although they could hear the people being shot, had over 200 years of police training. So police training really doesn't matter. And then you get into the arming teachers. No, we're not going to arm anybody. We're just going to stop disarming those who are willing and able, and they're carrying everywhere else without a problem. And then they'll say, well, we can't burden teachers. They're already busy. Yeah, they're busy until the first shot's fired. Once the first shot's fired, so I have a master's in education. So there's a fancy word called pedagogy that people with higher education degrees love to use to show how smart they are. That means the formal process of learning, teaching, and learning. And when I talk to schools, I say, hey, once the first shot's fired, ain't no pedagogy going on after that first shot. There's a bunch of learning going on, but there ain't no pedagogy. Teachers aren't teaching anymore. So the gun will not be a burden once the first shot goes off. It'll be an absolute gift from God if it's there in the first 30 seconds or so. And then there's several more, but one of the big ones is, you'll get shot by responding cops. The cops will show up. Chemistry teacher will have the gun out. He'll shoot the chemistry teacher by mistake. Can't do it. So because of that extremely rare possibility, we're just going to let the active shooter shoot 30 or 40 of our kids. Yeah. Why is it so rare? If we stop it in 30 seconds, I half jokingly say you'll be on your third cigarette by the time the first cop gets there.
Right.
And that's not a bang on cops. That's a bang on our 911 system that brings the cops there. So Jack Wilson, if you've seen the video, shot the guy and killed him less than 3 seconds after he started shooting people in his church. Jack does not know how long after he shot the guy it took before the first 911 call was made. But he does know after the first 911 call was made, it took 4.5 minutes for the first cop to knock on the door of the church to be let in. So the chances of a responding cop showing up while the fight's still going on, if our counterattack stops him, is it's possible, but it's extremely low.
Yeah. What's been your let's talk about something good. I mean, not that this isn't good, but what's been your biggest success since you've cracked this to a certain extent. What
Okay.
has made what's your best warm fuzzy since you've been doing this type of training and talking
Okay,
about
we've
this?
been focusing on schools. So in schools, it'll be they were locked down, and I got the superintendent to say, okay, we're going to let people do what they think is most safe for them and the kids that they supervise. That's a huge win.
Yep.
That's a huge win. That is a super huge win to tell everybody optimize the three. So like I said, I had a teacher, female teacher. I have to be careful when I say elderly because I'm 61 now, but elderly, taught there for decades. And she said, I had a big 6-foot bookshelf in the back corner, and I figured out it works just as good right by the front door, the classroom door. And she said on the walkthrough, which is the third phase of training, she said, I am now a certified sexist. I sit larger male students. She's taught 11th or 12th grade. I can't remember. I sit purposely my larger male students on the row next to the door. If I say we're going to barricade while we evacuate out the window, those boys know. They get up and they push that bookshelf in front of the door. So now is it almost nearly impossible? Even if he shoots the lock to crap, he's not going to get in the room. But she just bought herself 12 to 13 inches of ballistic protection, because now the bullets have to come not only through the door, but through the back of the bookshelf and then front to spine through all the books. She thought of that all by herself once she was told, you make it better. And I had a young female teacher who had a piece of driftwood at home that was like 4 foot long, about 2 or 3 inches in diameter. And she said, I had it at home on top of one of my bookshelves as kind of a decoration. Now it was decoration in her room, but she says on opposite day, I'm going to crush his head like a tomato if he sticks it in my door.
That's the spirit.
I like her.
And churches, if I can get them, and before Sutherland Springs, when that guy shot 46 of the 50 people in that church, a lot of churches struggled with having a response team, and that broke the camel's back for a lot of churches. But now I got to convince them it's a win if I can get them to put part of their security team outside, because a little over half of church attacks, the shooter starts shooting outside.
Starts outside. Right.
So if they can identify and stop him out there, the chances of a low victim count are just unbelievably high. So moving them out there. And then businesses, I went up, talked to a large medical office run by a doctor from some Eastern European country. I do not know which. And as I'm going through everything, she just sits there absolutely stone-faced, didn't make one facial expression through the entire thing. And then when I got done, I was like, any questions? And she just looked around to everybody and she says, well, I guess we wear guns. And so that was a victory.
Okay.
But again, if I can just get them to change from lockdown drill to everybody makes their own choice, and then if I can get them from everybody makes their own choice to we highly encourage anybody willing and capable to be violent, those are huge, huge victories. Another one, I urge school resource officers, when I talk to them, in 2023, I spoke at the National School Resource Officer Conference. I'm doing that again this year. And I urge them, make a 60-second video of reloads and malfunctions, because I can give several examples of where people chose to fight or to run while the shooter was reloading or dealing with a malfunction. But for non-gun people that don't understand what's going on. So I urge SROs to make a 60-second video and say, if you see a box coming out of the grip of a handgun or out of the front of a long gun, or you see repetitive hand motion going back and forth on top of either gun, there's something going on with that gun, and it doesn't work right now. So that'd be a good time to fight or run.
It's an opportunity, yeah.
And about 2 weeks later, I can't remember what state the guy was from, but he says, hey, man, just let you know, and he sent me the video. I made this video. I got permission to show it to the staff of his high school. He goes, give me another 1 or 2 years and I'll be showing it to the students.
That's great.
So, yeah, those are all victories of people trying to do the right thing, trying to minimize, God forbid, if it comes to their location.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, that is. There's a lot of information you gave us that I'm going to be thinking about over the next several days, especially while I prepare this recording to go onto the podcast. In regards to your book, I hope and I think plenty of listeners are going to be pretty intrigued. Is the best place for anybody that wants to learn a little bit more about what we've been talking about, is the best place to find that on Amazon?
Well, Amazon sells the book. It's hardback is $29.99, and the only reason I ended up making hardback was because I wanted to be able to donate that to like libraries and stuff.
Yep.
Paperback's $19.99. Kindle's $3.99 for you ebook type people. not a promise, but a hope. A goal is by the end of the year, I'll have it on Audible.
Excellent.
So they can go to, just make sure it's my book, black cover, first 30 seconds, because there's been some fakes out there popping up. First 30 seconds by Ed Monk. Now, I have a webpage for the book. It's first30-seconds.com. But if you go to that page, it'll just talk about the book. But then if you click buy now, it'll take you to Amazon. So it's being sold right now on Amazon.
Great.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's where I got my my e-copy that I started reading, and like I said, I'm probably 15-20% through it, and it's very intriguing. So I'm definitely going to finish it. And I'm pretty sure I can speak for Leigh to say I think we'd like to have you back on, in another year or so. Follow up on the rest of the book that I read. We're planning on going to the Goals event that Gun Owners of America is going to have in August. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you plan on going to that?
No, I haven't been invited to it, and so far hadn't been planning on going. But I see Stephen Williford at many of the events I end up going to, and he keeps saying that I ought to go to it. But right now, I don't even know if it overlaps with something that I'm doing. But it sounds they apparently outgrew their Tennessee venue, so that's a good sign.
Yep, it's in Des Moines this year. I believe it's
Yeah.
the first weekend of August.
Yeah, I work with a lot of schools in Iowa for some reason. But yeah, no, I'm not going to Goals as of now.
Gotcha. Well, I'd like to keep in touch a little bit because I'd love to continue this conversation and have you back on the podcast as a guest. If there wasn't anything else specifically that you wanted to mention, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to talk to Leigh and myself.
Oh, absolutely. And buy my book, buy it for your school board members. I spend most of my time now traveling the country. I do 2 to 5 trips a month. I leave on Thursday to go to Washington State, and then I go to Detroit, and I can't remember where I'm going after that. I speak to churches, schools, and law enforcement agencies, and then conferences for churches, schools, businesses, and law enforcement agencies. If I can help anybody out there in your area, please contact me because that's what I do. Appreciate y'all having me on your show. This has been great.
Absolutely. What's the best way to contact you? On that website, is there the ability
there
to get
is
hold-
there if you go on my first 30 seconds first30-seconds.com for the book, there's a place, and people do contact me off that. My email is edmonk, my name, EDMONK @AOL.com. And yes, AOL is still in business, still works just fine. And people, what?
Dating yourself.
Yeah, and I don't carry a flintlock pistol, and I don't have a rotary cell phone. But no, AOL still works. And then my cell is 870-273-1113, and that's my cell. You can call or text me on that anytime.
Okay, that's great. Ed, thank you very much. Leigh, was there anything
No,
else?
it was certainly a pleasure. I enjoyed every minute of it, and I do hope that we get a chance to talk again, and I wish you the greatest success. I can't wait. I'm going for the hardcover because I'm just crazy that way, and I'll add it to my collection because I love reading everything about these subjects. So,
Where are
can't wait
y'all
to
in
do it.
Illinois?
Just a little southwest of Chicago by about 40 miles.
Okay. There is a lady that attended my Heroes Conference and attended my active shooter instructor class from Chicago, and she's working on possibly bringing me up there. So, but nothing's been confirmed yet. So there's a chance. And then a law enforcement agency brings me to Springfield about every year, but that's my Illinois experience so far.
Gotcha. Well, we'll be sure to keep in touch. And if at any of these events or anything like that, we get a chance to meet in person, that'd be great. But I know that we'll talk again at the very least.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ed.
Thanks again, Ed.
Yeah, we'll talk to you real soon.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Contact me if I can help you.
Thank
Pleasure.
you.
Same here.
Yep. Bye.